it's just so much fun to watch that, and to watch that now. Like it's one thing to watch it in the 90s when I was like 4, 5, 6 years old, but to watch it now, it's really quite amazing, and it still holds up. I mean, these are two movies that I really still love. And a huge part of my childhood, these films. But I like them both because, you know, they have... The Wizard of Oz, I will say that, they are different. They are different. The reason why I'm comparing them is because of the performances. But the reason why they're different is this. The Wizard of Oz has a good family moral. It has a good family message and everything. I'm not even going to tell you what it is, because you've all seen this movie. You know what the moral of that movie is. So I'm not going to pound it on your heads and put the nail in the head, okay? So you already know what it is. 101 Dalmatians, even for a remake, written by the late, great John Hughes, actually. He wrote the screenplay for this. And you can kind of tell, because the last half hour of the movie does kind of feel like Home Alone. If you really watch the last half hour of that movie with all the farm animals, doesn't that kind of feel like Home Alone a little bit at the end of Home Alone with the traps going and everything? It feels like that, but I like the remake. Glenn Close, this is one of the roles she'll be remembered for that role for the rest of her life and beyond. It will. That role is Cruella de Vil. Those two movies, they just bring back a lot of memories for me. I really love those movies, and I still watch them to this day, and they're great, and I love those performances, I really do. I love both those actresses. Margaret Hamilton and Glenn Close, they're so over the top, but they're enjoying what they're doing, and I love those performances, I really do. Next one. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. You know, it amazes me that Roald Dahl, who wrote the book, did not like this movie. I'm amazed by that. Because even though I will admit they did change a lot from the book and put in the movie, because in the book it was all about Charlie, and in the movie it's the opposite. It's all about Willy Wonka. It's not so much about Charlie. But what I love about the movie is this. This was the first time I ever saw Gene Wilder in a role. Okay, I never heard of Mel Brooks. I never heard of Young Frankenstein at this age. I never saw any... I couldn't watch the Richard Pryor movies that Gene Wilder did with him because I wasn't old enough to watch those yet. But what I loved about this movie was the fact that, you know, each kid stereotype, I guess, or caricature is a better word for it, Gene Wilder is just loving what he does. And this role, again, this is a role he'll be remembered for. Much like Glenn Close in 101 Dalmatians and Margaret Hamilton for Wizard of Oz. This is Gene Wilder's role as Willy Wonka. This is the role he'll be famous for the rest of his life and beyond. And it amazes me that this movie didn't do well when it first came out, but because of cable television and, you know, home video sales and everything, the movie just became this phenomenon. Now everybody watches this movie when they're kids, and it's a very good movie. It's really good. The effects, I will admit, yeah, it was 1971. A lot of the effects in this movie are not that good, but the acting is good. Gene Wilder cracks me up every time as Willy Wonka. Like there's a lot of the scenes. I'll never forget this. The scene with the golden geese and Veruca's like throwing a tantrum fit and everything, and he's like, I'll never forget. She's like, "Daddy, I want the golden goose," and Charlie's like, "Here we go again." And, like, it's little scenes like that I just find funny. The scene with the fizzy lifting drinks. I mean, I remember that scene, like this with the Oompa Loompas, and yeah, I'll address the tunnel. I'll address the elephant in the room. The tunnel scene, guys. I still don't know what the point of that was. My argument is this. It was 1971. There were drugs everywhere. What else can you say? I don't know what else to say, because I don't know what to make of that. That scene, everyone on the internet has talked about that. Yes, that scene scared me to death. I couldn't watch it. I couldn't watch it. And I'll tell you this, though. Tell you what I used to do, okay? In the house I used to live at when I was first born, it was a one-story house. And when the movie would come on, I was afraid to fast forward and rewind it, because I was afraid if I fast forward it and pressed play, it would end up right at that scene, and I'd have to look at the TV and I would be too scared. I couldn't look at it. I could listen to it, but I couldn't watch it, because I was like 4 or 5 years old here, okay? So what I did was this. When that scene would come on, I would go into the kitchen and just listen. And because I knew when the scene was over, when it was over, I would look out, and I would sit back down and watch it in the living room. I couldn't watch that scene. It scared the shit out of me.
This is terrific.
How much to get off the boat, Wonka? And they're certainly not showing any signs that they are slowing.
I was terrified of that scene. Terrified of that. And I know I'm not alone in that. I am not alone in that at all. Yeah, but aside from that, this movie is really good. It brings back, I can say this for all the movies, it brings back memories. It just does. Brings back a lot of good memories. Really good movie. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Next one. The Sound of Music. Okay, now again, much like Beetlejuice, this is one of the movies I talked about in my top 20 favorite films list, so I'll be brief about it. This was one of the first musicals I ever saw. This was about a year and a half before Cats. Okay, before I saw Cats. This was, I think, the first musical I ever saw. It got me interested in other Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals. This movie, winner of 5 Oscars, including Best Picture for 1965, this movie is the ground barrier of childhood. It's childhood in a bottle, this film. Everything about this movie had something to do with my childhood and what was going on in my childhood at the time. Like, for example, I'll give you an example here, okay? There's a scene in the movie when they do the Lonely Goat Herd scene, the puppet show. And for everybody out there that, at Wonderland Pier, the man and dog that I like at Wonderland Pier, those animatronics, the puppets in that movie reminded me of the man and the dog. It just did. It just clicked.
Lusty and clear from the goat herd's throat herd, lay, hodl-lay.
I mean, that's why that's my favorite scene in the movie. It still is my favorite scene in the movie, the Lonely Goat Herd scene. It just is. I just love those puppets. I love the imagery and everything. I love the animatronic. Well, not animatronics. It was the 60s. Well, no, they were puppets. I really like that. I like that scene. I love Christopher Plummer as the captain. Julie Andrews as Maria. I mean, I just, and the children, like the kids, and the music is great. The songs are great. The directing is phenomenal. It's just, man, is this movie so good. I mean, it's like, here's the thing. If you're not a fan of musicals, fine. I know a lot of people aren't. But this is still a good movie even without all the music. I can't imagine this movie without the music. The movie would kind of suck if it didn't have that. But as the story goes, it's a very good story. I like it, you know? And it's just, it's all about childhood for me with this movie. This movie brings back a lot of childhood memories for me. It does it for my dad. And I'm sure, and we're not the only people in on that. I mean, I know a lot of you guys that probably feel the same way. If you guys haven't seen The Sound of Music, check this movie out, man. This movie turns 50 years old this year, and man, it's still too young. It's such a good movie. It really is. Next one. Help. I mentioned before when I talked about the School of Rock that I was a huge Beatles fan. This was the first Beatles movie I ever saw. I remember when my dad bought the Beatles anthology. He had it on a DVD box set, and they started talking about the films they made. And I didn't see A Hard Day's Night till a couple years later, but Help was the first one. We had a Blockbuster right near us. They didn't have it. You know what video store did have it? B&C Video World. It was a place that was right next to a Super Fresh where we used to live. And it wasn't there for long. It was there for like the first 5 years where we lived in that area. But for the first 5 years it was there, they had every movie you could imagine. Every movie. Every film. Every film you could imagine was there. If this was my sister and myself, our realization. If Blockbuster didn't have it, B&C Video World had it. And they did. And we went there, and I'll never forget it. They had a Hard Day's Night, they had Help, they had Magical Mystery Tour, they had Yellow Submarine, and Let It Be. And Imagine, the John Lennon documentary film from 1988 that I own on DVD. They had all those movies. Those were the Beatle movies they had. And we always rented Help. I loved that film. And my friend, I'll give a little shout out to him, Jeffrey Stoddart, he got me hooked on the Beatles, and we were just crazed Beatles fans from 4th grade through 6th grade and 7th grade. Talk to any of our classmates, they'll tell you we were huge Beatles fans. And Jeffrey, because he's a huge fan, he knew everything about World War II, the Vietnam War, World War I, the Civil War. He could go on and on about everything about the war. And I remember when we were watching the movie, he could point out these little facts about, like, you know, some of the things that were in the movie. Like, for example, there's a scene when they're singing the night before on that in that area, in that landscape. And the bad guys have, like, the tanks and everything. And he's telling me all this stuff that really it's almost like an inside joke, but people like me wouldn't get it, you know, because I'm there for the music, I'm there for the Beatles. But it's a good movie. It's kind of like Elvis, what Elvis was doing, because the movies that Elvis made, first of all, let's get this out in the open, Elvis is not a good actor. He's not a good actor at all. But what I found out was this. The movies that Elvis made, all his films, you know, the ones with storylines, not the concert movies, the ones with storylines, those movies were made as a big advertisement, like an hour-and-a-half long commercial for the album. That's what those movies were, basically, because they wanted to get the new songs promoted. That's what they were. And the Beatles, it was the same thing, pretty much. I mean, like A Hard Day's Night and Help. But they're very artistic, these films, you know what I mean? I like A Hard Day's Night. I love Help. Help is the one that I saw first. And a lot of good memories from that. I remember the scene when they're singing You're Gonna Lose That Girl in the studio. Boys, are you buzzing? I remember that. I remember the scene at Buckingham Palace when they have the red tear gas going off. It's like, must be that Tubry. And I remember the guy's like, we're going to have to give you guys protection. And like every minute whenever the bad guys are around, it's like, quickly men, after them, after them. And it's just the Beatles being the Beatles, you know? It's like it's them going from one place to another. At one point they're in the Bahamas and they do a song there. And then they go to Buckingham Palace, they do a song there. And they go here, they go like all over the place. And it's a really... I mean, it's a good film, you know. Yeah, there's a lot of good scenes. There's one scene I remember with special effects are actually pretty good here. It's almost like The Incredible Shrinking Man or something. When Paul gets shrunken down, it's like, hey, where's Paul gone? You know, and it says The Exciting Adventure of Paul on the Floor, and he's shrunk down to you know, like this small. You know what I mean? It's amazing how the special effects were in those days. I mean, you can tell it's kind of dated, but it still kind of holds up, even for 1965. It's still pretty good. The music, if you're a Beatles fan, you know what the music is. It's the album Help. It's the music on there. You know, Ticket to Ride. We all remember that sequence when they're skiing. We all remember when they're skiing with the poles. It's a great scene. That movie is so good. I love that movie. I watched it for the first time when I was 9, 10 years old. I still watch it. It's really good. Next one. Shrek. Everybody on planet Earth went to see that film when it came out. Every kid had to see this film, including me. And I went to go see this movie, and I was blown away by it. I just loved this film. From the advertising to Shrek.com. I don't know if you guys remember that website, Shrek.com. You could like paint these pictures of all the characters of Shrek, Donkey, Fiona, Lord Farquaad. You could do all that stuff on Shrek.com. I remember the website. I remember the DVD, the Shrek DVD with the technical goofs on the DVD. A lot of people were terrified by the technical goofs on the DVD. I wasn't. I thought they were hilarious. Shrek was an awesome movie. It was funny. Eddie Murphy was so funny in that. I remember my parents taking me to see that film and my sister to see that film, and we just laughed and laughed at that. Man, was that movie great. And I still love it. I have it on video cassette. That movie got me interested in DreamWorks and what DreamWorks could do, because you have to remember, at this time, DreamWorks had PDI, but they weren't like an animation studio. Like they weren't at a time when they were releasing animated films every year, like CG films, you know, because I think Shrek was the second CG film they made, because by the time Shrek came out, all they had done with PDI was ants. That was it. I mean, there weren't a lot of computer animated films at this point yet. I mean, Pixar had like 3 or 4 at this. Pixar was doing Monsters, Inc. at the time, and DreamWorks had Ants and now Shrek, and I think Blue Sky was working on Ice Age. That was about it. Nothing else, really. I mean, there wasn't a lot of computer animated films. There's tons of them these days, but back then, like 15 years ago, there weren't that many. But this movie, oh my God, so many memories of this film. The scene, there's too many funny scenes in this film to count. The scene when they're walking on the bridge.
Don't look down.
Look down. Don't look down. Shrek, I'm looking down.
The scene when Donkey walks up to Shrek and he's like, look, you love this woman, don't you? You want to hold her, please her? Then you got to try a little tenderness. That makes me crack up. It still cracks me up to this day, that scene. I love that. I love, I was shocked that Mike Myers did the voice of Shrek, because at age 8, when that came out, I'm like, because I remember thinking to myself, that doesn't sound like Austin Powers. Like, I was stunned that was Mike Myers doing the voice of Shrek. It didn't sound like Mike Myers at all. I was kind of stunned by that. And then you see him in television interviews and he does the voice and he's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I really liked that. I like the story. I like the soundtrack. I have the soundtrack right behind me up there, the soundtrack for the first film.